You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. And time for Julian and I to reflect on who it is that's probably going to kill us. With
You're an
the
assassin.
Mirror.
An assassin, Scott. An assassin.
Yeah. This is a very I don't know. This feels like a Twilight Zone episode. Like it's a comeuppance kind of episode. I want to talk about the ending and how the ending. I don't know. I'm unsure about the. I've got some historical questions, but basically this is a plot. It's a sort of a South American. This is clearly sort of like a Cuba, a similar story, but it's a South American country. There's been a sort of a takeover, and a dictatorship has been overthrown, and a Remos Clemente has led this revolution. He was a peasant who sort of struck up and built an army and has taken over, and he's now running the country, but starts to fall into the I don't know, the trap of dictatorship.
Paranoia.
Yeah, and in doing so, he's presented with a mirror that apparently will show him the person that will kill him. And he starts to see all kinds of things in that mirror until eventually, I'm not going to spoil it, he eventually kills himself, which is, yeah, we'll talk about the ending.
Yeah, probably the least satisfactory way to conclude this story. But, I mean, a couple things here. First of all, he does mention Cuba in the dialogue, right? So, like, Cuba and communist revolutions in Latin America have happened in this universe. We just don't know where this is, right?
Yeah.
It's also worth pointing out that this episode aired on October 20th, 1961, after the Bay of Pigs invasion, right? So, like, literally not only has Castro succeeded in Cuba, but we have invaded using Cuban refugees and failed and embarrassed and, you know, it all but broke the Kennedy administration. So, I mean, Castro's the bad guy here. And, you know, I mean, I guess that's okay. It could be a more complicated view of Latin America, certainly. But I don't need it to always be. I can also enjoy the Archer-esque, you know, antics of a South American dictatorship.
Yeah, it has that. And this is the 60s. It feels very trope-filled, very stereotypical, which is kind of fun. The first sort of there's a moment very early on, and I get that as I play my often game with I know your face. In this case, it was I know your voice. And the guy who plays Remos Clemente, and I was like, I know that voice, and it turns out to be Peter Falk.
Yeah.
I was like, Columbo is playing a Central American dictator. Fascinating.
You always knew Columbo was having people murdered behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, thousands of people being shot up against a wall for suspected murder. One of the things about this episode is obviously this mirror is the supernatural MacGuffin of it all. The sort of the give that you have to, you know, the thing you have to give it. But and I want to sort of get to, because what is it? He sort of like, you know, Clemente. He's got to the top and he sort of has this idea of sort of like, you know, well, I've given my country freedom, so everyone should love me, and sort of like, you know, but what it asks the question and never really answers, like, what comes next?
Mm-hmm.
Once you have power, like, what comes next? And all it seems to want to say is corruption and paranoia. However, what's fascinating is the person that he has overthrown knows of this mirror, and he seems fine.
Right. Yeah, it seems very strange. Like, I'm not convinced that the mirror really works. You know, because obviously, how did the previous General de Cruz not foresee his own downfall? Maybe we don't ever know that he's executed. He's still a prisoner, apparently, at the end of this script. So maybe he returns to power for all we know.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, that's the thing. It seems to have a very sort of nebulous ending. But the other thing is as well, sort of like Peter Falk, or sorry, Clemente, like, it starts with this sort of like celebratory thing of them sort of like, we've done it, and everyone's like, yeah. You get all the sort of the screaming and the shouting outside, the celebration of a free country.
Mm-hmm.
But the shift, I mean, like this seems to take sort of like, it covers a period of weeks, is what it seems to do, but it's never quite clear. But like the speed at which his paranoia kicks in.
Yes, I agree.
It's like, we've won the revolution, everyone's trying to kill me, is sort of like almost instant. But there's no sort of like, suggestion that like this has always been there, that he's always been a slightly paranoid guy.
Yeah.
That the war or the revolution has made him paranoid before he got there. It's almost like, you're a great guy, you're not a great guy, and that's it. Like, it's bizarre.
Yeah, it's also not clear how brutal he has been in this revolution. He is clearly a total sociopath. He even comments on how he doesn't feel bad ordering the death of his friends.
Yeah, that and this is the thing. Like, the first one is when he throws the guy over the balcony. And you can almost, I was surprised they didn't play it like this. You could almost play that as an accident, like they were tussling and he went over, and oh my god, like the first one could be a bit ambiguous. It's not, but they could have played it that way. But yeah, when his two friends go to visit Cruz in prison, and he calls up and he's like, tells the guards that two traitors are coming to shoot them on sight, like, the ease with which he does that never seems addressed. Like, everybody just seems to be a bit like, yeah, that's just the way he is. It's I don't know. It just seems very what's what I'm looking for? I don't know. It just seems very easy for him to fall into that, and everyone else around him is a bit like, yeah, this is what's happened. So I don't know. It never builds up. It just sort of happens, and that's sort of the switch that I'm unclear on.
Yeah, I guess when I think about this episode, I have two problems, and one is that mirror as a device that I'm not really sure how it works. Is it real? It seems to be expressing his paranoia more than anything that I believe is really about to happen. But then you have this guy who's giving him wine, and it's maybe the mirror works. I don't know. I have no idea. But this role of this magical thing doesn't quite click for me. And the other is, as you say, this sort of problem with this depiction of a Latin American dictatorship, in which, like, what is being said here? It's not that power corrupts.
Nope.
The truth is that in dictatorships, people do plot to take that power. But here, nobody is ever plotting. He's just murdering people. And yes, it's true that sometimes people in power are paranoid. Having said that, as you say, this does seem remarkably quick. And he does have to then be remarkably sociopathic for that to make any kind of sense. But then why does he kill himself at the end? I don't know. I find the message muddled.
No, I agree. I think that you say about the message being muddled. I think as well, like you say, it's almost missing like an emotional core. This sort of it keeps going back to this idea of sort of like, why is it that I've won? So why do I have enemies? Well, you have enemies because you've won. Sort of it tries to hammer home this idea of you're always going to have it. It's almost like it's lonely at the top. Seems to be the kind of the message. That's all it seems to have. But one of the things that's interesting, like you say, that sort of thing, the suicide at the end, like him killing himself. There's a priest that comes in and sort of like tries to confront him about the amount of killing that he's doing. And says, like, this has got to stop, there should be forgiveness, we've got to move on, and so on and so forth. And he's like, no, this is how I take control. And then when he does kill himself and the priest goes back in, he has this sort of like minor, a line or two, a little bit of mini monologue. It's like, oh, this always happens. They always end up killing themselves. So I'm like, Do
No,
they?
no. All right.
This is what I'm saying. Like, am I missing something from history? Where I'm like, I'm thinking about dictators, even like modern through to like old. I'm like, no, they often get killed.
Right.
Or if you take Hitler, like they often do, in a dire circumstance they'll commit suicide. But like, it doesn't seem to be a trend of paranoia driving dictators to kill themselves. Or are you suggesting that his suicide is mirrored by the people turning on him? Well, that's not in the episode, so I don't know what the message of this is. Like, even the final statement doesn't amount to anything. It's it's a weird episode in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree with that idea of this, the last assassin. He was himself the last assassin, and they never learn. They never seem to learn. Well, what lesson should they be learning? I mean, not to be paranoid and just seize power and actually put a government together. That sounds like a good. That sounds like a good plan. Except we're told that he's a tyrant, and the closing narration is, all tyrants. And any resemblance to tyrants, living or dead, is hardly coincidental, whether it be here or in the Twilight Zone. Okay, well, Serling's heart is in the right place, right? But, I should also point out, like, the idea that the priest is the good character who has to call him on how horrible and bloody he is, when the reality is the most bloody dictatorships in Latin America were run by priests.
Yeah.
So it's not as if the Catholic Church is like averse to murder of people.
No, and this is one of those weird ones where I'm like, we've just, we've literally just recorded sort of a recovering of the pool game as a sort of the remake. This is the one where I'm like, I would take this episode and remake this, and you could easily remake this and do a good story, but you need to shift the metaphors. Like, you need to slightly shift your metaphors, but I think you could do this quite easily, and have it in a similar vein and do that similar thing of sort of like the because one of the things that they talk about how long this is taking. Like a year ago I was a peasant in a field and I looked up and and sort of that's where. So this is taking a year. Mm-hmm. And so you go, okay, that's quite quick actually for a revolution. That's quite impressive. So why is he sort of this charismatic person, sort of like so, all right, so let's get this thing. He's made it in a year. He's got these people following him. The people are cheering him. What then happens? Like, please tell me a coherent, have a single objective and tell me that thing. I think you could do something really interesting, especially with this mirror. But yeah, it doesn't work in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's still not a bad episode.
No.
But it is kind of middling, especially for Twilight Zone. I will say that right at the beginning, I thought, am I watching the right show? Because the Latin American setting and the sort of resemblance to Castro was so immediately apparent to me that I thought that seems so out of touch with the normal Twilight Zone episode. I was just utterly shocked. And it's got quite a large cast for Twilight Zone episode 2. And I did think I will sort of give it points for what it's attempting to do and for addressing something that clearly is out of the comfort of people shooting in New York City, or LA or wherever. This is not in their comfort zone and it shows, but at least they're doing something like ambitiously out of their comfort zone.
Well, one of the things I would say that works well, you say it's a large cast, and it's a surprisingly large cast, but it's down to like almost like to a single set. Mm-hmm. And so it almost plays like a bit like a stage, like a play. Like, you could have this as a single, almost like a locked camera, and you could do this sort of thing. And I like that as well, that this never leaves this position of power, this office, this sort of presidential office. I like that element of it because you could have it all sprawling and all sort of stuff, but like having it locked in this room, it does give it an element of that paranoia. Like, they are locked in this room together. Like, this is where, he doesn't want to leave this room, and he has this, the noise of the executions just keeps coming through the window and stuff. So actually the setup of it is actually really good. I like all that stuff. It worked well for me. By having it quite claustrophobic, it felt it added, at least it gave that paranoia something.
Yeah, and I like the actors. I think they work. I do think that there's a version of this that is a lot more successful. We do have to believe like Ramos Clemente is just a sociopath. The way he talks about torturing the crews is just over the top. But I do think there's a version of this that highlights that kind of no exit feeling that you're talking about, and sort of says, not just that power corrupts, but instead maybe says like, yeah, they were idealistic revolutionaries, but now that they're in power, watch them all turn it to each other with suspicion. Over the course of this little play, watch them kill each other one by one, and question each other, and watch that paranoia take hold. That could be quite exciting and quite successful.
Yeah, there's good thing. I do want to sort of give Peter Falk some due on this. Like I find it, like you say, he's a bit over the top at times, but he is really fun to watch. Like I do sort of like find him kind of fun, and he gives some really intense moments. So the cast are really good in this. But it's middling. I wasn't bored, but when I came out of it, I was a bit like, oh, okay. The ending seems a bit of a letdown, but it's not a terrible ending. So yeah. Any final thoughts then on The Mirror?
No, I mean it's a middling episode, but it's a fascinating window into this 1961 incoherent thoughts on Latin America, which as an American, I'm very used to America having incoherent thoughts on Latin America.
Yeah, I think this that's a really good point. Like this is a bit mixed messages in both its politics and its sort of its messaging, but it's kind of fun. I do enjoy some of the stuff that's in it. So it's a middling episode at best. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you sort of get a chance to reflect and look at yourself in the mirror and see who that final assassin could well be. But for now,
are you telling our listeners to kill themselves, Scott? like look
no,
at the mirror.
I just realized what I said. Yeah, no, don't go, don't do that. Somebody to listen.
Yeah, we have 4 people who listen to us. We can't afford to lose any one of them, Scott.
Ignore the mirror and carry on listening to the podcast. That's what we're saying. Anyway, for now, I'm going to move on very quickly. Let's move on. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening and giving your support. We very much appreciate it, and we shall see you on the next episode.